Hello and welcome to the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast, where we listen to people's fairy encounters. But take heed, we're not talking about winged Tinkerbells here. These are real fairies, real encounters that took people like you and I by surprise. Stay a while and hear their stories. My name is Jo Hickey Hall, and I'm a folklore researcher. Hello and welcome to the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast. My name is Jo Hickey Hall and I'm here this time with my guest Ricky. And Ricky, you had contacted me some time ago to talk about a childhood encounter that you'd had. And you've just been reminding me that actually this is the first time you've spoken about that. So firstly, welcome.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks for coming and sharing this with me, and start wherever you like, really. But that's interesting that you were kind of prompted to contact me after listening to the London Goblins episode.
Yes. Thanks for the opportunity. That was a really interesting episode, and just listening to it and the experience and the description of what she encountered, well, it really did just stop me in my tracks. I thought, my goodness, I've never talked about or written about my experience ever in my entire life. And it's always been there in my mind, and it's always kind of been at the back there. And it just took that little prompt to go, gosh, I'm not mad. Yeah, and not unique. And I think that was the thing. I think when you realise that your experiences aren't unique, that all of a sudden actually it's a lot. I don't know. It's a lot easier to talk about. Anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. How old were you when this happened?
Gosh, I don't know. I might have been less than 10. Not far off, around about 10, I think, possibly. So we had a lovely place to live. My dad worked for the council, and so it was a council house, but it was actually bordered right onto a very large park. The park itself used to be an old farm, but a lot of the original trees were still there. I guess the main ones amongst them were the giant puriri trees. These things are huge. They're really big trees. They're really very old. And they're quite impressive. But the park was also next to a lake. The lake's an ancient volcanic crater. And it was kind of in Auckland, New Zealand. So the trees I think the big trees are probably not more than about 600 years old, the big ones, which is when the last eruption of the volcano just offshore happened. So it was quite a funny sort of place. The local indigenous people, the local Māori, it was very important to them. The lake itself as a food source, it's full of eels, just absolutely chocker full of eels, and the beach next door. Also, there's a grove of pohutakawa trees nearby called Te Uru Tapu, and they're quite special. The pohutakawa trees are beautiful. If you've never seen them, have a look. They're lovely, sort of silvery grey colour. They live on the coastline. But this particular grove of trees was used to place the wrapped bodies of people who had passed in, and they would leave them there for a year or so to let nature take its course, and then collect the bones and then store the bones in beautifully carved boxes in lava caves around the lake. It's an enormously long history. It's a really, really, really special place. And then post-European, it became a farm, and then it was acquired by the council, and it became a park. But the trees persisted, the big trees particularly, because they're insanely hard. They're incredibly, you just can't cut the darn things down. And I remember Dad used to collect old fence posts which had been made out of it, and he'd be cursing and swearing because they would just blunt the saws and the chisels and all the rest of it. So So yeah, it's quite an old place. Our house was funny. It was an old, it was quite an old place. It was a council flat, well, a council house rather, not a flat. I suspect it was probably one of the original farmhouses there. Not
Okay.
entirely sure. Dad was a builder. He was actually a building inspector for the council, but so he was quite happy modifying it and adding walls and taking walls out to accommodate a growing family and then a shrinking family and all the rest of it. So it was a bit of an odd house in that regard. But yeah, it was a fantastic place for a young kid to grow up.
It sounds it. And just kind of so much happening around the edges too. And I love the idea of these trees that seem to go on and on. Like if the wood is
Mm,
hard to to not so malleable, but goes on and on, I can really understand why the local indigenous people would maybe associate, leaving their beloved dead around these trees that seem to be,
yeah.
super trees. Um,
Yes.
that sounds incredible. And so did they carve the boxes from that wood? Is that what
No.
they were?
No. No. No.
Ah,
No. No. Different timber. Different timber for the
okay.
carvings. Yeah. It's just pre-European Māori didn't have metal tools, so some of the tougher woods were not easy to carve. But that said, um, some of the stone tools they did have, like the ponamu, which is a nephrite jade, is harder than steel.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
but the carvings, if you have a look on the museum website or somewhere, they're just beautiful carvings, extraordinary.
Amazing. What do they depict? What kinds of
Oh, yeah, why hugely symbolic. Māori didn't have a written language, but they did have a very um, rich oral history and also history captured in carvings and in weaving and stuff like that. So
mm,
it's not trivial surface decoration. Everything has a meaning and a connection, and the more you kind of come to understand the meaning behind the symbology, it's quite regional as well. Carvings in the north are very different from carvings in the south, and so you can look at, if you know what you're looking at, and I don't really, you can look at a carving, tell where it came from and what it represents and stuff like that. So yeah, that's quite important. The place land for indigenous population is incredibly important, obviously for sustaining life and society and community as well, but also a deep connection to the land.
yeah.
Mm,
I'm thinking about the way that so in a lot of the dolmens that we have now that I grew up around, like this one behind me, we know that the indigenous communities left, when somebody would die, they would we don't know exactly what they were doing, but they would be placing and removing the bones and doing something with them and doing some kind of rituals with them, as just as we do now, as in connecting with our loved ones when we passed in a
yeah.
meaningful way. But to have the bones, there's something about that, and
Mm.
I've always thought that that would be a really precious thing to be able to have access to. So when the bones were buried there, would they go every so often and perform any kind of rituals there, or would they just literally, perhaps that happens later, because like
I don't,
with
yeah.
these, yeah,
No,
difficult to know,
yeah,
isn't it?
I'm not really familiar with the cultural side of it.
I must find out. I'll it'd be great if you could send me the
Well,
links
yeah,
for the museum. I'd love to take a look at
yeah,
that.
yeah. I'll do that for sure.
Yeah. So, so you grew up in this place where, you were living in nature. It's not like it was on your doorstep. You were plonked right in the middle of it and in the
Yeah,
midst of
yeah.
it. And so how was that? How did this kind of encounter come about in terms of your relationship with the landscape?
It's kind of funny. So, for, for a very long time as a young child, I was a real scaredy cat.
Scared. Scared
Scared,
cat.
terrified of
Right.
scaredy cat. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
Terrified of the dark. I was a kid that had to sleep with the light on, the door open, the covers pulled up over my nose,
Yeah.
to the point where I was actually almost scared to go to bed. I was scared of the dreams. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know if that was an influence of the surroundings or if it was me or whatever. But anyway, and that's kind of what built up to the encounter, which made it quite dramatic for me. Um, so I'd quite often get, you wake up as a kid, you've had a nightmare, you go and hide in mum and dad's bed and, look for a bit of comfort there. So one night I don't know what had driven me out of bed, climbed into bed with mum and dad, they immediately rolled over, went back to sleep. But what it's like when you wake up from something like that, you just eyes like saucers and acutely aware of what's going on around you. And so I was laying in bed on my side looking towards the door. As I said, Dad was a builder and he was a bit of an odd character. So the door, I don't know where he got it from. It must have been an old office door or something like that, because about 2/3 of the way up it had a clear glass pane. Not something I've put in my bedroom door, but I'm sure he got it for free or cheap somehow. So I was just kind of looking at the door just because it was, in my line of sight. And that was when, the figure appeared, like head and shoulders, maybe 12 inches, about 30 centimeters tall, or 30 centimeters head and shoulders is what I could see of it. So I guess if we extrapolated normal proportions, overall it might have been, I don't know, maybe a meter at the most, tall. And it was quite grotesque features almost, slightly, not looking like a person, or quite distorted almost. And the head came straight up. And at the time I thought it was odd because it was a small head, obviously a small creature. So how did it get, 3 or 4 feet off the ground? I'm not sure. Still no idea. But anyway, the head popped up, and it turned and it looked into the room through the glass, and it looked at me. It could see me. And I could see it, and there was recognition there, and it was malevolent. It was not nice. It was. I don't know if you've seen something and you've been scared of it, but it's not that fright scare. It's that, oh, this is not good. This is not good. And it was quite terrifying. Yeah. And I kind of got the feeling I really felt like it was looking for me. Almost as if it had been around, it had been looking for me, and then found me, and then it saw me, and it couldn't get to me. Boy, that was terrifying. Yeah.
I'm feeling it as you're telling it, and that sense of dread, and the way that you say its head just popped up, and then you're thinking, oh my God, what was it? How did it get up there? Was it levitating to get up there? And my imagination's running away with me now, because I feel like I'm right there with you, and I can imagine how terrifying that is, and that sort of thud, that place where your heart is thudding because it's like a dread feeling of
I've
terror.
got the shakes now.
Yeah, I can only imagine how you would feel as a little kid as well. And so you think so you were below the age of 10, and do you know sort of what because you mentioned you've been having dreams around that time. So was this something, do you think you'd been doing this a lot to sort of go into your parents? And if so, can you remember what the dreams
I
entailed?
can't remember any of the dreams,
Mm.
honestly. I just remember, I absolutely remember getting into bed, scared of what scared of what is going to, what's going to happen.
Mm.
Whether it was, um, yeah, I was every night terrified. To the point where you establish little rituals, like in your head, and it sings. And I was an odd child. I go to bed with a cup of tea.
Well, it's a
Because the
coping
sugar,
mechanism. It's a coping
yeah.
mechanism, isn't it? Whatever works.
I,
So sorry, did you say that you'd made a cup of tea? Is that
oh yeah,
what you heard?
I'd often go to bed with it. You got your comic book and a cup of tea, and
Yeah,
I'd read for a little bit. And weird things like if it rained, I knew there wouldn't be any dreams.
that's
Just
interesting.
stuff like that. It was, yeah, and I don't know if that was me creating a something in my head that said that no, this has happened, so the dreams aren't going to happen, or whether it was a real association. Or a coping mechanism. I'm not entirely certain, but yeah, it was. So yes, I was probably quite a frequent visitor to mum and dad at night.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, so every night my bedroom door had to be open with the hall light on, so there was light coming into the room, curtains drawn and hiding under the blankets, all that kind of stuff.
Mm.
I used to be quite convinced that at night my toys would move.
Yeah.
They'd be in a different place in the morning. Mum always said I was nuts, but no, I don't know. Maybe,
It's so
but
hard for anyone else to understand, though, isn't it? Because the thing is, your parents don't want to, at least to you, take that seriously.
no,
Um,
no,
I mean, I would now obviously with my child because I know, but most people, their main concern there would be to calm their child so that they can go to sleep without feeling frightened. And that's what we're kind of told to do. Oh, don't
yeah,
worry, darling, it's just nonsense. Oh, it's just a dream. Oh, don't be silly if that doesn't happen.
yeah,
And then, that on the one hand is being, it's out of kindness, it's out of love, but it kind of leaves you with, well, what can I trust? The part of me that knows there's something not right here, or the
yeah.
kind of external, source of love and authority that tells me that I'm wrong, from a really good place. But it sets up a very confusing set of experiences for the child that is experiencing something, but is told that that's not how it is.
Mm.
Um, do you remember? I guess the fact that you were reading a comic kind of narrows it down in terms of age-wise, that you would maybe have been slightly older than perhaps younger age of sort of 4, 5, 6, maybe more
Oh yeah,
7,
yeah,
8,
yeah,
9. So
yeah,
did you think
yeah,
more 7, 8,
absolutely.
9?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And what kind of comics were you reading?
Oh, Commando comics, of course.
Okay.
Commando and battle and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I wondered,
Sort of, yeah.
did you
Sorry.
ever use, sorry, I was just wondering if you ever used any of the tactics or skills or techniques that you might have learnt in those comics. Do you ever remember kind of, I'm not sure that the commando would sort of necessarily depend on his cup of tea or, I mean, the rain is an interesting one because that kind of suggests, and I don't know what you think about this, but it kind of suggests that, well, I guess maybe not, that it was coming from outside the house into the house? Or do you think it was in the house and something would trigger it in the house?
No, I
What's your
think it
feeling?
came from outside.
Came from
I
outside.
don't think it was in the house. The house was nice. It was lovely. Um,
Yeah.
it was kind of weird with the way that Dad had modified all the bits and pieces of, walls and things like that. And he built a workshop underneath it. And no, I was quite happy with the house, but it was certainly outside. The bush was, sorry, we call it forest bush in New Zealand. The bush was really interesting. I had one experience in the, I only really had one kind of odd experience in the bush, and that was when I was in the Boy Scouts, the local scout hall was not far away. And then one evening, I think they sent us all out to go and play hide and seek or something. I think they just wanted to get the kids out and have a cup of tea and a chat. So we all took off out into the dusk, running around in the bush. And I was with my friend who was just in front of me, and someone walked right past me. And I said, "Gotcha." And my friend turned around and said, "Who?" And there was no one there. And it was a reflex. So I didn't fully register what I'd seen. And it wasn't until my friend had turned around and said what was there. And I thought, all I'd seen was a grey outline of a grey shadow of a person. But just absolutely it was a person. It was just, they were right there in front of me. It was just right on dusk. I think any brighter I wouldn't have seen it, any darker I wouldn't have seen it. It was just on that right point. And I knew every inch of the bush. I knew everywhere, and it kind of came out from the side of the track, across the track in front of me, and disappeared. It's just so fast. Yeah.
Would it have been, what kind of size or height would that figure have been?
Oh, adult size, I think. Yeah, it was taller than me.
Yeah. And when you say track, is that like a walking track or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so the bush was, because it's quite close to an urban area, the bush was full of little paths and tracks all the way through it. And, yeah.
And it's close to the lake as well, then?
Oh, yeah. It was probably only 100 meters from the lake.
Really?
So
okay.
Right on the water's edge. I mean, as kids, we used to play in the water and next to it, and yeah.
How was that? I mean, it seems to be that often the kind of more frightening experiences, you can look at the London goblins as an example. And even, I don't know if you've heard the episode of the Green Goblin climbing through the little boy's window. It might not be one you want to listen to, but actually it's a really lovely story. And this little green-skinned figure was very welcome in that child's life, as it happens. But but also that was where his house, kind of at the back, it went on to a forest, quite a large forest area, I think, with a creek and a train track. So there was water in that area, and actually that figure disappeared into a drainage ditch. So again, connecting him with the water. So do you feel then that figure could potentially have come from the water? When you think about that, do you have a sense of whether it may have came from the bush, just within your own body, if you like, whether it came from the bush or from the water?
No, I think it came from the bush.
Right.
I don't think it came from the water. The lake is incredibly old. Someone will correct me, but I think it's erupted about 50,000 years ago. There's no streams coming into it. It's entirely from springs and runoff.
Yeah.
So it's it's deep, very, very deep. I would never go there. I used to swim in it, but only in certain little bits, because it was really scary.
With the eels as well, that's going to be fun.
The eels, yeah, and the eels we used to try and catch the eels, but not my favorite to eat.
Did you tell your parents about No,
No, no,
no.
no. I mean, I don't know why I didn't tell him. I don't know why. It was, yeah, it was a quite, I guess I was too scared.
Mm,
I didn't, I think in I guess the fear is in the retelling it, you give it substance
yeah,
and you're inviting it back.
yeah.
And there's no way on this planet I wanted to see it again. Which is, and then that kind of leads on to the weird thing that happened afterwards. Um, and that was probably the bit for me that I never really, not that I understood what I saw, but the other bit I never really understood was not long after that, one evening, I think I was watching a television program or something, and it was someone wandering around I think it might have been Country Calendar, which is one of the rural programs here. Someone was wandering around a paddock in the dark, and I suddenly realised I'm not afraid of the dark. Like, it wasn't a gradual thing. It was, nah, I'm not afraid of the dark at all. And I went to bed that night, and I remember, because it was quite a weird feeling. It was almost like a joy. I closed the bedroom door, drew back the curtains, and opened the window, and slept like that ever since.
Wonderful.
It was overnight, and and the progression from that was the park, which in the dark was quite scary. Even now, if you look at it, you go, "Nah, I'm not wandering in there in the dark." Um, I loved it. I used to go down and wander around in the dark. Um, I used to get quite excited. I'd take a torch. I never used the torch. I'd walk down to the lake, and I'd just use a torch to try and spot the eels, see if you can see the biggest one in the water, because they come right up to the banks at night, and then turn the torch off and wander back home. Even got to the point where I used to kind of dare myself to go into the spookiest, darkest corners of the park and wander in. But it was just, it was so comfortable. And the bizarre thing is, I've always kind of thought, I've just seen what's out there, and yet now it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
I don't understand.
yeah.
I mean, and I guess that's why it's kind of always, um, I never really talked about it or but constantly thought about it. I mean, how did that transformation happen? Because it was a transformation. It was overnight, and it literally gone from hiding under the covers to lying in bed, looking out a window through an open window at the moon. Gosh, I don't know. It was weird.
I love that. I mean, it can literally happen like that, though. You know, we can make a decision in our lives at a
Yeah,
really deep part of ourselves, and because we kind of recognize. So I don't know, there is something within all of us, and that is possible, where you can just, you know,
yeah,
decide from now, actually, no. And it can be even, and I'm not saying it was this, but it can be a kind of sense of defiance against whatever that fear was as well. For some
yeah.
people, then they make a decision at a really deep place, and then it takes some time for that to play out. Like, for
Mm,
instance, if they have a fear of water and they say, right, this is enough, enough, enough of the fear of water, I'm going to crack this. And then they make that decision and they take small steps towards it. So they will go a little bit deeper every time or whatever. They
mm,
give themselves, you know, as you were saying, sort of going to the spookier places, give themselves a little bit of a push, a little bit of a push. But at the same time, you can, you know, click your fingers. And if you've made that really strong intention from that moment, no, this is it. I'm not going to be frightened anymore. You have
mm,
the absolute power within you to do that. And we're not always told that, really. Um,
mm.
but it's a very useful one. And I think if that's kind of risen up naturally within you, I love that. I love the fact that you just decided at that moment, and the fact that you're then going out into the bush and you're
Testing it.
experiencing. Yeah, yeah.
Mm. It was really testing
Mm,
myself and testing, I guess, testing the new the new confidence. But I like the word defiance.
hmm.
It's almost like, yes, I've seen you. I know you're there. You don't scare me. You're scary, but you're not scaring me. Um, yeah. And ever since then, I've always felt utterly comfortable in the bush, in the dark. And later on in life, um, I joined the Army Reserve, and it was only it was only then I realised actually that not everybody is comfortable in the dark in the forest. Being able to sit, but for me, being able to sit, you can just sit anywhere in the bush. You can sit quietly and just listen, and absolutely safe. Just that feeling of, you're part of it, and you know what's going on around you, and you're absolutely safe. Um, it's great. So it's a wonderful feeling.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there that, it's part of you. You are, or think you said you are part of it. When you
Mm,
enter these spaces and you enter them in recognition of that,
mm,
that you are part of it and it's kind of part of you, then there's no need for the fear because
no,
the kind of like the division, and you can apply it to lots of different situations, can't you? That we see where, the division creates, or the fear creates division.
yeah,
Um, and when we're kids in our society, in our sort of modern Western society, we are told that, there's dangers out there. It's very other.
mm,
Nature itself is very other. Whereas if you look at the actual place that you grew up in and the indigenous communities there, it was not like that for them.
no,
It was, birth, death, everything took place in
yeah,
and around nature and in honor of nature, and they were part of that. So, perhaps there was something in growing up in that really sacred environment. I was very lucky to grow up around that. Maybe there was something of that kind of that aided that the sense of that.
yeah. It was, yes, yeah, very strong. Yeah, the the bush was so old that had had a feeling of itself. You didn't go into a park with a whole bunch of trees. It was a collective. It's funny, hey. You often hear people say, "Oh, I went for a walk alone in the forest," and da, da, da. You're not alone. Everything knows you're there. The trees know you're there. Birds, animals, insects, even the mycelium under your feet know that you're there, and everything's watching you, wondering what are you doing, you know, and and it takes a long time to settle into that environment and for the environment to get used to you. And it's funny, I mean, people sometimes, we went fairy hunting, but we didn't see anything. And well, what do you expect? You go, imagine sitting in your living room, having a cup of tea, watching the telly, and someone comes barging into your house looking for you. Hello, what are you going to do? You're going to hide. But, if they knock politely at the front door, introduce themselves, and oh, look, they've got cake. It's a much different scenario. But yeah, accepting that you're a part of it and that it is a whole. It's not just an isolated tree, but it's actually a part of a whole bunch of things. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I love this sense also of the way that you knew this place so well and it knew you so well. And I'm just wondering
yeah,
whether, as a child when you're playing there with your friends and family and what have you, did you have brothers and sisters?
yeah. Just one brother was living with us at the time. The others had kind of grown up and moved out, and
So,
he was there for a while, but then he moved out. Yeah,
right, yeah. And when you said there was this kind of like sense of familiarity with that being, do you think you might have known it from the bush potentially? Do you think that perhaps is there a potential element of recognition from when you were playing?
yeah. I guess so. Yeah.
that feel right to
Yeah,
you?
yeah. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, because it didn't. Yeah, definitely. I mean, when it looked at me, it knew me. So yeah, it's yeah, it's an interesting idea, but scary. But yeah,
Well, it kind of puts you back in that experience as the little boy, but actually, maybe there's this possibility where it just wanted to know, to know you. And if there's
yeah,
something, I mean, not everybody can, or not everybody does do what you did, where they, face their fears. They go out there, in this defiance and say, right, I'm not going to be frightened anymore. And not only that, but I'm gonna make this environment, part of my life and get to know it very
mm,
intimately as you did in all those
mm,
places that people might go, oh, well, okay, I'll go for a walk maybe in the day, or okay, I might go for a walk in the night, but I'm definitely not going to go to that place. And you're heading straight to those pockets. You're becoming very intimate with this place. And
scary. Yeah,
I being in the forest myself at night, I know what that's like, where, and I've talked about this before, where we used to go for rituals, and in preparation for the ritual, we would go into the dark parts of the forest alone, break up individually, and we would be, what I felt, something coming out of the darkness right up to your face, almost as if they were sort of checking you out and having a look at you. That's how it felt to me.
mm,
Something in the darkness. It was part of the forest itself. It was an aspect of the forest, whether that was a being or just the character of the forest at night, I don't know. But we all experience that. And so when you're doing that, not everybody responds that way to an environment. And I'm just wondering whether this being maybe saw something in you that it could communicate with, maybe if that you were
yeah,
open. Um, do you feel like it was malevolent?
yeah, but not evil. If you know what I mean, there's a wantonness
Yeah.
about some things, but and I guess yes, it wasn't nice, but did it mean harm? I don't know. Just because something's not nice and it might be it might be, scary, doesn't necessarily mean it means harm.
Yeah.
And yeah, and maybe that's the connection to the revelation later that, well, shortly after that, actually the forest is all right. I like it there. Yeah. There's only one other. I've only ever had one occasion in the bush where I felt uncomfortable, and that was one night. It was an army. It was an army training exercise. I was reasonably senior, so I was working that day and working that evening. So I said, I know where you guys are going to be. It was in a plantation forest just north of Auckland here. I knew where they were going to be. So I said, look, I'll come up later on and I'll walk out and I'll meet you. So I parked the car about midnight after work, put my pack on, went for a walk. Beautiful evening, like bright moonlit, bright moonlit evening. Walking, really comfortable walk. Lovely. It was just a lovely evening to be out walking. It was really nice. And I was crossing, kind of, you walk down the track, then cut through the bush, cut through the trees, these plantation pines, and then there was a large area that had been felled, and it was just and it really it was really desolate after coming out of the trees into this wide open space. Trees have been cut. There's still a lot of rubbish on not rubbish on the ground, still a lot of branches and stuff on the ground, kind of making my way through that, but it was wide open, bright moonlight, heading down towards. It was about 2 or 3 kilometres, and only another kilometre or so to go to meet up with the rest of the group. And as I was coming down the hill towards the tree line, it just kind of stopped me. It was so desolate. The place, it was desolate, is the only real word for it. But then the tree line, looking at that, and I've never been uneasy around going under the shadow of the trees in the dark. But boy, that night it did. I couldn't, I looked down at the tree line and no. I actually turned around. I was only a kilometre to go to where I was supposed to be. I turned around and I went back and I went home. Because no one was planning I was going to cross that tree line. It was a line, and it really said, no, don't cross. And it was kind of weird. Got in a bit of trouble because I didn't turn up, but it was worth it. There's no way. Yeah. And that's probably the only time I ever felt uncomfortable in the dark and in the forest. But it wasn't my place either.
No.
It was not. I was new there, and so yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can move through that. Sometimes it can just be like that, where you meet a new landscape to begin with. It can feel a bit unwelcoming, and then sometimes you can kind of push through that the more you familiarize, as you were saying, sort of turning up in a place and expecting to be able to feel welcome. Sometimes it takes some time to actually sort of build that up. But the other thing to say is that, trusting your intuition, maybe there was something there aside from the idea that, of course, with this destruction and desolation of this place, something about, that being in the landscape, maybe it was making it a dangerous place to be. Maybe that conjures up some other kind of energies that are not good to be around, or brings forth something that you do not want to face by yourself at that time of day. Because that time of day, you're sort of going into nighttime, and that's a very potent time. So maybe there's, listening to that intuition, you could have escaped something. Could have even been a warning from the forest itself. You're never going to know, but I think it's right to trust it and act on it.
Yeah, I think so. Oh, it was really it was a really powerful urge. I think, definitely I didn't belong there.
Yeah.
And I wasn't welcome there. Maybe if I had more time to connect with the place. I think environments need to get used to you as much as you need to get used to them. And it's, we know that the environment around us is acutely aware of our presence, and we're often oblivious to that awareness. But it is. But when you connect with that, and you become a part of it, it's a great comfort. So when you go somewhere new and you don't have that, it's like being in a strange town and you don't know, what are the rules here? What's going on? This looks scary. That's not good. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I wonder if you'd ever talk to any of the Indigenous community, the elders in the community at any time. Did you ever have access to be able to, I don't know if you ever went to school with anybody that was able to tell you about the history of the area, or was it ever discussed?
No. Yeah, unfortunately, through the colonisation process, a lot of the Indigenous people being displaced, and land was taken, and there's a lot of hurt in the land around that. But the connection is still there, and the Māori have a great tradition of spiritual beings in the landscape. The main one is that everyone kind of thinks of as a taniwha. And taniwhas are often associated with water. They're often a guardian spirit. Sometimes they almost they have personalities of their own and things like that. They're a part of the landscape, but they are the landscape, but they're also their own beings. They're quite remarkable, and I'm sure the late taniwha, absolutely sure of it. And you have to respect that. If you, and I think if you don't, and many Māori will say, if you don't mess with the taniwha, or it's not going to end well. But there's a lot of Māori traditions around spiritual beings. They have the Patupaia Rehi, which is the Māori fairies.
Yes.
A lot of stories about those. Typically, they're described as tall and fair with red hair, which is really completely at odds to Polynesian people living in mountains and the mist and all the rest of it, but not so much in the lowlands, coming down towards the low. So, yeah, it's a landscape populated by more than just people, and there's ancestors and there are spiritual beings, and there's so yeah, it's a very complex and very rich place to be.
It sounds it.
The features were quite grotesque.
Mm-hmm.
Don't remember. The mouth was kind of small. The nose was a bit large. The eyes were large. I don't remember any hair as such, or even clothing really. Mm-hmm. You only saw like the top bit briefly. But yes, it wasn't your classical goblin. It looked more like a small old person, but distorted almost.
So the skin colour,
pale.
Right, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Eyes were dark, but that might have been the light. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting. I'm thinking about the rain, so yeah, perhaps there's something about that. Maybe, well, who knows? It seemed to you anyway at that point, for some reason, that if it rained,
it was going to be all right.
You were going to be all right. So there's something in that, isn't there? There is something in that. Did you obviously never mentioned it to your brother?
No.
So did he ever have any trouble sleeping or anything? I'm guessing he is a bit older than you then.
No, he was probably 8 years older than me. So
right.
Around about that time, he was out looking for parties and trying to get into the pub underage.
And the other thing I wondered was around the time that this happened, and then later around the time that you decided that you were not going to be frightened anymore. First of all, what was the period of time do you estimate between the two? Are we talking kind of months or a year or?
Oh no, it would have been weeks or a month.
Weeks or a
weeks
month.
or months. Yeah, it was not long at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, very very quick.
That's great. It's kind of like it feels like a gift somehow, even though, because I mean, these experiences, people think of fairies and they think, oh, it's, people that haven't talked to people like you and I who've had these encounters or never heard an actual real encounter. But from the outside, people will assume that it's, waving of wands and maybe, making wishes come true and things like that. So maybe there's kind of like a kernel of truth to these tales, is that there was a gift here. There was a gift here, and it wasn't packaged in a kind of fairy tale packaging where something skips along. But nevertheless, and nature never really works like that anyway, does it?
No.
there's kind of a process, and the fact that you then, possibly as a result of that, decided not to be frightened anymore and stepped through that threshold of fear.
Yeah.
You then found yourself in this kind of limitless place where
Yes.
you could actually commune and relate and feel the environment around you, and that kind of two-way communication. And not many people get to realize that in their
Mm.
lifetime. So to kind of get there as a little boy is, I feel, a real gift.
Oh, it felt it. I mean, it felt. I mean, it was really joyful. It was. It was a yeah. Not being afraid. It was a revelation, and it was a joy and a freedom. Yeah. Wow. It was quite
You're
cool.
you're free from the fear.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a big,
Which was one.
it's a huge thing.
Yeah. It was very big.
Do you feel like you've carried that through your life with you, that freedom from fear?
Oh yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And even where I live at the moment, we live right in the middle of the bush. There's the Waitakere Ranges, which are next to Auckland. We're up in the ranges, and our little piece of land, which is only about half an acre, but we've got enormous trees. Where we are has been here, was subdivided in 1929, I think it was, and our little corner of the section, because it actually sat on a swamp, was never felled. So the trees here are as they have always been. And we actually had a botanist come out one afternoon, and she had a happy afternoon wandering around photographing trees and recording things and stuff. So yeah, but it's lovely.
Fantastic.
It's really nice.
That sounds wonderful. It's reminding me, I don't know if you've heard the episode, A Tree Teacher and Two Sons, which is this woman who was in New Zealand. And actually, it might be nice to put you in touch with one another, because she grew up really loving trees after she had an experience as a child, and she now does everything she can to protect trees in any which way
Oh,
she can,
lovely.
and has a piece of land. So it'd be nice to get you both in touch.
Mm.
I'm thinking about what happened afterwards when you had this revelation, and you felt changed as a person. Did that then have some shifts for you in your life, at school with friends and all of that? Was there a shift that took place for you at school?
Probably isolating at school. You know, as a young boy, you go to school. It's all about sport, parties and all the rest of it, and I just didn't register with that. So yeah, it wasn't terribly beneficial in that regards towards my social life. That's for sure.
But it certainly
But
put you on your path.
oh yeah, and I wouldn't change anything.
Do you do something now that kind of encompasses this relationship you have with nature? I'm just wondering.
Um, apart from the usual getting out in the bush and tramping and doing all that kind of stuff, I love to work with wood. I do a lot of work with wood, carving. Wood and carve wood and stone and stuff. But yeah, so the connection is still there. Yeah.
And have you passed that on to anybody else in your
No, I don't
family?
think so. None of my kids are. Oh, possibly. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. They might. They might. Oh, and running. I mean, I run a lot with the dogs. I had two dogs, and there's a fungus going through the forest here at the moment, so they've closed off most of the tracks. But before they close the tracks, every morning I used to take the dogs for a run. And in the winter, it inevitably was dark. You're on the track at 5:45 and running with them, and I knew the path so well. I never ran with a torch, and it's quite fun to actually try and try running on a bush track in the dark with your eyes closed and listen for the sound of your feet on the track to tell you where you are.
Ooh, amazing. Wow. You've
That's
gone
kind
up,
of fun.
that's kind of like several levels beyond now that you've gone then basically of just
Oh, it's kind of neat.
yeah, that's almost what you might experience in dreams. That's kind of like,
Yeah, I
you know,
suppose. Yeah,
yeah, it's like
yeah,
it kind of feels beyond the material in some ways, doesn't it? Because it's just like, yeah, I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna regard the material. I'm just gonna be, in this moment.
yeah.
Yeah, wow,
It's
that's inspiring.
fun.
So great.
Just try it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thanks again. I'm really blown away by your story actually, and also feel extremely honored that you've told it to me, and are allowing this to be shared with other people too. That's massive. Um, and I feel very humbled that you
Oh,
trust
thank you.
this enough to do that, because I know that it's very precious.
And thank you for the opportunity, and I really appreciate it.